The alarm echoed through the metallic halls of the medical bay. The medic, one of the few humans assigned to this distant outpost, was already on his feet by the time the message flashed across his console. Emergency, life support failure detected. Evacuate now. He pulled on his gear and sprinted toward the docking bay, skidding around a corner just as the airlock doors hissed open. Out in the bay, the sleek alien vessel drifted, flickering light signaling systems in crisis. Normally, he was cautious around unfamiliar ships, especially those bearing no recognizable markings. But the weak transmission had carried something desperate in its tone. Moving quickly, he secured his helmet and stepped through the airlock, wading into the cold, foggy atmosphere of the ship. It was as silent as a tomb, save for the hiss of his own breathing. His flashlight illuminated dim corridors and flickering panels, showing signs of a severe power failure. But it was only as he reached the core of the vessel that he saw her. The alien girl lay curled up, barely conscious, her skin an iridescent blue-green with faint, pulsing light patterns across her forehead and arms. She couldn't have been more than a teenager by her species standards, small and fragile-looking even by human measures. With no time to waste, he knelt by her side and started his assessment. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin felt ice-cold through his gloves. "Stay with me," he murmured, knowing she likely wouldn't understand but hoping his tone conveyed some sense of comfort. He administered a stabilizer from his medkit, watching as her breathing evened out. When she opened her eyes, they were wide and disoriented, a swirl of color shifting in her gaze like clouds across a night sky. She tried to say something, a whisper in a language unfamiliar to him, but her strength faltered. With practiced efficiency, he lifted her into his arms and carried her back to the medical bay on his ship. 4 hours, he worked to stabilize her, treating the injuries he could and monitoring the readings that fluctuated wildly across her strange physiology. A mix of advanced technology and pure luck kept her alive through the night. He stayed by her side, watching as her body's bioluminescence dimmed and brightened like a heartbeat. When she finally opened her eyes again, there was a clarity in her gaze, something profound and ancient for such a young face. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The translator he'd strapped to his wrist struggled to make sense of her words, rendering them clumsy but clear enough. "You were in trouble," he replied simply. "I was there. I helped." The alien girl watched him with an expression that he could only describe as awe. She sat up slowly, her wounds healing with surprising speed, her gaze never leaving his face. He could feel something different in the air, something shifting, almost as if the very atmosphere held its breath. Days passed, and he assumed she'd eventually recover and leave. Yet she stayed, shadowing him quietly around the medical bay, curious about his work and the tools he used. Her eyes followed his every movement, her expressions varied, sometimes curious, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes something he couldn't quite define. On the 5th day, she approached him in the middle of his rounds. He was reviewing a file when she placed her hand gently over his, her skin cool and smooth. "I have something for you," she said, her voice delicate but steady. He was about to ask what she meant when she lifted her other hand, her fingertips glowing with a faint, silvery light. The air around them seemed to ripple, and he felt a warmth spreading through him, a sensation so profound it left him speechless. The glow grew brighter, illuminating the small room in a cascade of light. He felt it settle over him, a warmth that seeped into his skin, his bones, as if she was pouring something of herself into him. It was overwhelming yet strangely comforting, a feeling he could hardly describe. His vision blurred, and he saw flashes of images, her family, her world, memories of her youth. He saw her fear as her ship drifted, her loneliness and despair, and finally, her gratitude. When the light faded, she let go of his hand and stepped back, her face a soft, warm smile. What was that?" he managed, still breathless. "A gift," she replied. "A part of me, so you may never be alone." He didn't fully understand, but he felt different, warmer, more attuned, as if the quiet spaces within him now carried an echo of her presence. The first sign came during a routine medical scan. When he pulled up his own readings, out of curiosity more than necessity, they showed changes he couldn't quite comprehend. His neural patterns were altered in subtle ways, like tiny tendrils of new pathways branching from his thoughts. Sensory readings were heightened, too. Colors seemed richer, sounds clearer. Even his sleep had changed, bringing vivid dreams of places he had never been, strange landscapes awash in colors and lights he'd never seen. He would have brushed it off as stress or exhaustion, but there were other, more undeniable shifts. When treating a patient, he found he could sense their pain before they even spoke. It was subtle at first, just a sense of discomfort when he walked into the room. But soon, it became more specific, almost like a gentle whisper in his mind, guiding him to an injury, to a place that hurt, to where his attention was needed most. With these insights, his treatments became more efficient, his patients' recovery times shorter. The other medics on the ship noticed, marveling at his precision. The alien girl, who had by now become more than just a quiet presence in his life, observed all of this with a knowing glimmer in her eyes. One day, as they sat in a quiet corner of the med bay, he looked over at her and asked, "Is this part of your gift? This connection I feel with others?" She nodded, her face serene. "It is part of the bond one shared with you. In my people's culture, we call it Ithrain. It means the shared pulse, a kind of empathy that binds us." He took in her words, wondering at the depth of her people's culture. The bond between them had grown in ways he could not have anticipated. He could feel her presence even when she was nowhere near, a gentle brush at the edge of his mind. There was comfort in it, a grounding warmth he'd grown accustomed to. Weeks later, they were sent to a war-ravaged planet to tend to those caught in a battle zone. As they worked side by side in a makeshift field hospital, he noticed something extraordinary. The connection with her allowed him to share his own strength with others. He watched as wounded soldiers would ease under his touch, their panic quieting, their pain seeming to lessen, even though his physical treatment had only just begun. It was as if he could channel her gift of peace through his hands, through his voice. She looked on, her face soft with pride, as though this had been her intention all along. On their last night there, they sat atop a ridge overlooking the burned-out valley below. The sky was dark, stars faint through the haze of distant fires. He turned to her, wanting to ask about the strange, vivid dreams he'd been having. Visions of her people's history, their music, their rituals, scenes as clear as if he'd lived them himself. But before he could ask, she spoke first. "You carry us with you now," she said, her voice filled with something he could only describe as reverence. "You'll always carry a part of my people." He felt a pang, an ache of understanding that surprised him with its intensity. "Does that mean you'll be leaving?" Her eyes met his, reflecting the distant stars. "I have to," she replied softly. "I was a wanderer, lost and alone, until you found me. Now, I am bound to return, to honor what you've given me. A second chance." A hollow ache settled in his chest, one that her gift could not heal. But he nodded, understanding. In the days that followed, they prepared for her departure. On the final day, as he walked her to the departure bay, she placed her hand over his heart and closed her eyes, her fingers faintly glowing with that familiar silvery light. He felt a wave of warmth, of peace, of something deeper and vaster than he could name. "Goodbye," she whispered, her voice like a song, a memory that would echo within him for the rest of his life. And as she disappeared into the starry void, he felt her presence linger, a quiet reminder, a gift he would carry forever, an unexpected bond woven into the fabric of his very being. Over the years, he continued to feel her in his dreams, in the quiet moments of his life, a gentle presence urging him forward, reminding him that he was never truly alone. And though the universe was vast, in his heart, he carried a part of it that was no longer just human.